Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Welcome to Books We've Never Read.
Except for those we have.
I'm Nicole.
And I'm Jason.
So welcome to the show. This is episode 1 of our first book, The Three-Body Problem by Cixin Liu. This is week 1, chapters 1 through 6. If you're just joining us right here in this episode, make sure you go back to our channel and check out the syllabus episode. It outlines what the book is and how we're breaking it down each week. We'll playlist each book for you. We encourage you to comment if you have anything you want to add to the discussion, or if you have any book recommendations. We'd love to hear you or read your comments below. So yeah, like and subscribe and join the party. Go get the book if you haven't yet. So you ready to get going?
Let's dive right in.
Okay, so chapters 1 through 6 includes all of part 1 plus a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And part 1 is called Silent Spring. So let's explore your thoughts on Silent Spring.
So what's really cool about Silent Spring is it's all like the backstory that we're gonna need. It's all of the it's all the stuff about like the communist revolution and everything. And I'll be honest, I could have read a whole book just about that.
Just these first
because
chapters.
Like his writing is so beautiful, and there's this scene here at the beginning about like the girl who gets shot at the top of the building, and she falls, and like slower than like the flag she was holding or whatever. All that stuff was so good.
And the bullets pelting into her body like raindrops.
It's like raindrops, yeah.
Lots of comparisons to nature when there's like brutality in the scene.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and they were like really horrifying. The scene where the father, I can't remember his name now, but
oh shoot, Yezitai.
Yeah, whenever he was like being beaten and all that, like that was a really horrifying scene. I think that torture is really scary. I think that like I'm not afraid of demons. I'm not afraid of vampires. I'm afraid of people. And that scene that's a thing that has happened. That happened to millions of people in China. That's a real thing.
Yeah.
And that's so scary. And I think he really drove home kind of how horrifying some of that stuff was. And so I think it was really interesting. I think it's interesting that he even but like was willing to write about that. And we've talked about this a little bit before, but I think it shows the communist revolution in like a very negative light because it's brutal and horrifying, and you kind of see it a little differently. But
yeah, I just see it as it was very realistic. And when it goes forward, this might be out of this section of the book, or yeah, I think it's out of this section of the book, so I won't mention that yet. Sorry, I've read ahead. But it's very realistic, and we'll come back to that point. All I could think of while I was reading Silent Spring was 1984 by George Orwell. Everything was gray. I saw everything in gray, just like I did with 1984. I could smell cabbage. I don't even know if they eat cabbage in China, but they did in the world of 1984. And going into this book, I knew what it was supposed to be. I knew it was going to be sci-fi, but I forgot all about that. That all went out the window while I was reading it, and I thought I was just reading another dystopian novel.
You get no sci-fi vibes there. Yeah,
right.
At least not in the first chapter too. For sure. Can I say something that really grinded my gears? Okay.
I had a thing that just really I wrote down a couple of quotes. The black banner of capitalism represented by the theory of relativity. This like anger of education and science and be mad at capitalism. Okay. But like science,
right? Well, so there's even that conversation about how the Big Bang leaves space for God, and so like you can't have the Big Bang, right?
I made what'd you make a note of?
So I made a note about this, about the whole concept here, and like this was a real thing, in like some of these like mid-century like communist revolutions, I suppose, but where science should fit philosophy, right? Whatever we're studying, whatever we're doing, if all people are supposed to be equal, it should be that, right? Like there's no room for God. There's all these different things. And I believe, and I didn't make a note about this, and it's a shame, that there's actually, the author has a conversation, maybe in Yejitai's head, about how this is an inversion of Marxism, because Marxism is a philosophy made to fit science, right?
Mm-hmm.
He thought it was scientifically inevitable that Marxism would happen, that there would be this fall of capitalism, that capitalism had to happen before Marxism. And so that Marx's ideas were like perverted to this point.
Yeah.
Where the science must fit the philosophy, whereas the base of this movement is this other way around.
Something I really loved from all of that, like, are you saying that God exists? Mm-hmm. He's saying he doesn't know.
Right.
And I just think there's so much power in being able to say, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
That there's just not enough information. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, that was a good part.
Do you have anything else on
chapter 1?
On that part?
Talking about his wife, Shaolin.
Mm-hmm. The cackling.
I really dislike her. She is made to be disliked, right? Like they you don't use the word cackle, and I don't know what the word was in Chinese, but in English you don't use that word if you're trying to make somebody endearing, and I don't think she's a sympathetic character. I think she's a bad person, because they talk about how she turned the tide, like she saw where the tide was going, and she started teaching some of this like philosophy in her science courses before anybody was ever threatening anyone. And so I see her as partially responsible for where they are now. And
Sure.
The fact that she goes mad and loses her mind right here doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me, because I feel like it's in some way like a just reward for her past behavior.
And it just shows the mental gymnastics that had to happen by the people who were subject to these revolutions. And we saw it in China, and we saw it in Russia, and we saw it in Cambodia. We saw it everywhere where people, they're just trying to survive. So I don't know that I really fault her. I don't have any kind of opinion on it. I understand that she was just trying to survive in this world, and it's quite unfortunate that she ended up betraying her own husband and losing her children out of it and all that.
I mean, like, I understand the motivation, because there's no, like, if she hadn't done that, she'd be up there being executed with Yeshitai.
Right. But in a way, she was executed anyway.
Yeah.
Again, reminding me of 1984. Okay, so, if you haven't read 1984, you should. But there's this whole thing where it's like, no matter what you do, you're going to accept the party at the end, and they're going to shoot you in the back of the head. You're going, as soon as you accept them, then they'll kill you, and they won't kill you before then. And that's exactly what happened with Shaolin, right? Like, she accepted the party, and full acceptance, she died.
Yeah.
Or whatever happened to her, I guess she died.
Yeah. I guess just like in my head, you go out with your people, right? Like, you don't, it's not like, you don't get to abandon your family. And, I mean, that's just like my moralism there, right? But she's an interesting character, and the fact that they threw all that in is interesting.
But all of this is really just building up the backstory of Wenjie.
Yep.
And she becomes our first main character. Would you call it a hero? I mean, when you're reading the book, in chapters 1 through 5, she's the
I have
hero.
also read ahead right now.
But
sure, yeah, she's
chapters 1 through 5, she's the hero of the book. And then in chapter 6, we're introduced to a new character.
Yes. But right now, she even if you don't want to call her the hero, she's the only protagonist. Right.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with that.
Yeah. Okay, so a couple of other things that I have. Do you have anything else you want to talk about? I don't want to skip ahead of you. This is still chapter 1. I have so many notes.
Let's go. Yeah, my next note is for chapter 2.
Okay, so a couple other things that I thought were interesting. The only female character so far that I have connected to is one that I never actually meet in life.
Ruan.
And it's Professor Wan, who put on her lipstick and cleaned up her space that had been trampled on and died with dignity, and I thought that was really great.
Yeah.
Also important because it's showing us these professors who were, all these people that got killed off at this time, and this cycle will kind of repeat again later. The other thing that I thought was interesting is the storyline stops a couple of times and says, in 20 years, this will be seen as
Mm-hmm.
you know, or whatever. But we see, Wenjie's first breaking point. There's a quote in chapter 1 that says she could no longer feel grief, and that is that first point in her mind where something has shifted.
Yeah.
And that was when she saw Professor One. So she just watched her father get killed. She watched her mother go crazy. She got held back by janitors to keep from saving her father. And she goes and finds the only other person that she had a connection with was dead.
Yeah. So this just came to me talking about Professor One. In the Silent Spring, and in chapter 2, and you've read it, so this is not a spoiler. They were like out here deforesting like all these mountains and everything, and what we see in chapter 1 is also a deforestation, but it's a deforestation of like the intellect.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But so there's this thing, right? Like they're, for the sake of progress, it's slash and burn, right? Very interesting.
So I made a note that those who die violently are compared in nature, like the bullets hitting the girl, like drops of rain, like a bird unable to fly. That phrase was used to describe somebody's death. I don't remember. And Wenjie is compared to a Geiger counter. Now that she's no longer able to feel, a Geiger counter that had been like overused or something like that. I think that's, she's no longer there's nothing nature about her anymore. She's just a machine now.
Yeah. Interesting. Very cool. Yeah.
Chapter 2 is called Silent Spring.
Yep.
Oh yeah, chapter 1 was called The Madness Years. Rightfully so. So what do you think about chapter 2?
So, chapter 2 is really straightforward, and I honestly didn't think all that much about it. But what I did think was interesting is in what they don't talk about. So, Silent Spring, the book that they're discussing, has been out. I think they make a note. This has been making waves in America, in the West, for like a year or two. Is what they say. And Silent Spring is a real book, and it was published in 1962, which is the last year of the Great Leap Forward. And they never talk about that. They never once talk about the Great Leap Forward. So I'm going to bring back what I said about, like, I think they pitched this in a negative light, and I'm like kind of amazed that he was like allowed to write this anyway. The Chinese Communist Party is still like a big deal.
But did everyone know that it was called the Great Leap Forward during the Great Leap Forward?
But they don't mention it. He does not mention any of these like aspects beyond this like deforestation part, and then it's like this huge problem, right? So the Great Leap Forward, like millions and millions of people died because they centralized their farming and they did like deforestation. They actually declared war on birds and lost. There's like all these different things.
That's where birds get killed.
Yeah, they declared war on sparrows.
Oh.
And there's this whole thing, and there's so much horror that is happening in and around this time, and she's often like this little ideal spot and maybe a little disconnected from it. But we don't see that at all in this book.
But what we do see in chapter 2 is this massive betrayal from Bai.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think that's the important thing. That's break number 2. That's strike 2. There was a break in the narration here, saying 4 decades later, Wenjie would reflect on the impact that this betrayal had on her life. They had connected so quickly, and this was her first human connection since her father had died. So I don't feel like her character's developed very well. She's very Geiger counter that lost its effectiveness. She's very machine-like. And it's very lacking, but I think that there was this attempt to show some like heartbreak there, that she was very attached to this guy. And then this chapter ends with her being taken away after this betrayal and locked in that room with Chung, who can rot in the hot place. What a wretched.
She's the woman who tries to get her to sign all the paperwork.
To sign this paper that she had nothing to do with, and then calls her a name. And there's a quote in there that, when she realizes that kindness is a luxury. Oh, she can rot.
Well, like her sister had signed all these other papers, right? So like again, it's this betrayal by family.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, her sister was a Red Guard.
Mm-hmm.
Red Coast.
Just a Red
Red Guard.
Different thing.
Yeah, sorry. Well, speaking of Red Coast, that's chapter 3.
Yeah. So I'm going to mention this just about the chapter name. I think Red Coast is really interesting because there's no coast here at all, right? And I'm just
It's
pointing.
like a cliff.
Well, I'm just pointing that out because
Well,
I don't know
what
I don't know what the name is in Chinese,
right.
But, and this is not really a spoiler, in the second book of this series, they call it a different name.
The translator is different.
The translator is different,
and you can tell. You can tell in the way the dialogue. I mean, just sidebar, right? Like, hopefully you're in for the whole ride. But the dialogue is different.
Mm-hmm.
The focus is different, and I really want to find out some information about the translator's motivations behind how they translate it. I've also read that the German translation gives you a much different experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so if anyone can read German, let us know what's up. That would be so cool.
I can read German.
Get in there. Lots of exposition in Red Coast, and it's just her transition to Red Coast.
I'll be honest, I didn't find this chapter that interesting, right?
It's necessary because
it's absolutely
it's the next
necessary.
phase of her life.
But it's, she walks into a room full of people pushing buttons, right? There is a giant antenna. There are soldiers
that
right?
makes the world fuzzy or something when it goes off.
And it also is important because it introduces the guy who pulled the strings to get her here.
Yes.
Right, and so he is going to be a player as we move forward. And but it's just a lot of exposition, right? It's just a lot of here are the things you need to know so you can talk about the things that are coming. It was a short chapter.
Yeah.
But it was just exposition.
And it takes us into part 2 where we get our next protagonist.
Yeah, so this is where things get good.
Wang Mao.
Yeah. This is chapter 4? Yes. It's chapter 4.
Part 2, 3 body. 3 body problem.
Yeah.
Frontiers of Science.
Yeah, so the Frontiers of Science
this is also skipped forward.
Yeah, we're back into the
present day.
The present day, right?
What is the present day?
I don't really know. Nobody talks about the internet that much, and
but they have cell phones and
stuff.
Yeah,
they do.
Okay, go to this one.
Oh, you're right. Nobody talks about the internet yet.
Listening to that website, I'm like, oh.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the 2010s, right? I don't know. But look, so the Frontiers of Science is the organization that the cops and the police and the military and everybody are trying to investigate, and it's just the Illuminati boogeyman again, right? That's what they are, and I really dislike the whole trope of smart people are secretly evil. I don't like that. Now, in this context, it has to be, you know what I mean? But there's something very...
Man's a smart guy. He's not evil.
No, well, sure, but but there's this cabal of secret intelligentsia who something is happening, right? It's very Dan Brown. They're going to release a plane and kill everybody.
Building up the mystery. And again, I mean, after we had gone through all that exposition with Wenjie, we're going through it all over again.
And I'm reading this from the point of view of an American in 2022, where I see a lot of anti-science sentiment, out there.
Yeah.
And so I'm reading it, and in the same way that we have stopped taking. There was a period in the early 2000s where all the bad guys were just people from the Middle East, right? Mm-hmm. And we've stopped doing that.
Right.
And there was a time before that where all the bad guys were Russians, and we stopped doing that.
Chinese,
and we're moving on, right? And we had these things, and right now in the world, I see a lot of scientist bad guys, and I find that concerning because I think that something like the beginning of this book could happen again. I think that could happen.
Well, sure, it's happened before in many places, and it's just it's scary.
It makes sense in the context of this story for them to be the bad guys, right? I'm not complaining about that, but I'm just pointing out that I think in general we see a trend where the intelligence people are the bad guys,
right?
think about shows I'm watching on Netflix and things like that. It's always a scientist now.
Yeah, you have a connection? Make a little connection real quick.
So, I mean, like, I'm not quite done. I have 20 minutes left on Resident Evil. And it's all about how scientists mess up the world, right?
Yeah.
And there's so many things that are like that.
Jurassic Park.
Yeah, Jurassic. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, like, it's a thing. So.
General Chung goes into a whole thing in this chapter about how, there's a combat zone and we've experienced nothing. We have experienced no hardship up to this point after we just read 3 chapters of people getting pelleted with bullets.
Well, I mean, he just means, of course, in context of what is coming, which is supposed to make you terrified.
But I was just confused and I kind of overlooked it until way later. And I was like,
No, I mean, that could you imagine, right, if somebody comes up to you and says, yeah, I know you know about World War II and the Holocaust and all these things, but it is nothing compared to what is coming.
Yeah, wild.
No, thank you.
And then we have the whole crisis with Yang Dong and Dingy and then it goes into the okay. We also have Dasha introduced, who I love.
Lovable character.
Just New York cop in the middle of wherever they are.
Yeah.
And if you listen to the audiobook, it's very funny to listen to his voice. And he's so, like, rough around the... Just one of the stereotypes. Rough around the edges.
So on first read, you look at him and you're like, he's like smoking a cigarette, right? Like his shirt's rumpled, his tie is loose, and he's just not doing anything. And he's like he seems like a crazy person.
Yeah.
But he's not.
Yeah.
All of the stuff he does, he did to get Wang Mao to join the frontiers of science.
Yeah.
He knows exactly what he's doing. He knows exactly what he's doing.
He bamboozled him. The dude joined or agreed to do this just to prove Dasha wrong. And be like, I'm not going to freak out. And then he immediately freaks out in the next chapter.
I want to back up for a second and talk about the the young lady that killed herself. Did we write her name down?
Yang Dong.
Yang Dong, right. This moment where Wang finds out that Yang Dong has committed suicide and he's like, this was the most destroyed.
Yeah.
And it's about a woman he doesn't know.
Yeah.
He doesn't know her. He doesn't know her. It's grocery store love.
Yeah.
Right. So I have this concept about grocery store love, and it's whenever you make like eye contact with a stranger and y'all, and there's this like idea that in another life, this has become a thing, and that's what he has.
Yeah.
Right? That's exactly what he has.
They cross paths one time.
They cross paths, and there are infinite universes where that moment became something, and he feels that about her.
Yeah.
And he's like, he's not just lost her, but he's lost all the possibilities of her. And I think it's a like slightly creepy scene, but it's really beautiful at the same time.
And I think it's actually very human. We build these weird attachments to people we don't know, and we're like,
Yeah, sure.
In literary terms or literary analysis, that is called the gaze. Like a significant look between people, or that feeling or the thought that like you are being gazed upon.
Gotcha. I love chapter 5.
The game of pool.
Yeah. Wow.
They like shooting a farmer.
I do like that one too. So
I have 0 notes for the game of pool, but it is the most vivid in my mind. I could replay it exactly like a movie.
Yeah. So this one's really cool because it's just like 2 dudes drinking, right? And
one in absolute distress because his girlfriend has just died by suicide.
So and his name is Ding.
Dingy.
He's
Ding's his last name.
Oh, okay.
They do surname first, just so you know.
Dingy.
Dingy.
I'll just say the whole thing. He's horribly traumatized. Wang shows up partially because he's like just trying to like vicariously learn more about this like dead lady.
Were they friends?
No, they don't know each other.
They be acting like friends.
Yeah, they don't know each other at all. Well, he just like goes like, take me to his house, right? Like just wanders in.
Told the Uber like
crazy.
Follow that car.
Well, and you make a good point because at the end, Ding says go check in on her mom. Right?
It's like, you don't know any of these
Yeah.
people.
Hey, I know I don't know you, and I know you don't know her, and I know you don't know her mom, but like, can you make sure she's cool?
So I wonder how realistic this is.
I have no idea.
What's the stranger danger culture like in China?
No idea.
Or this region of China?
If you
or this
know,
part of China?
let us know, because
Yeah.
that's interesting. Sure. But so here they are. They're playing pool.
Also, China's massive. Do we have any context of where this is happening?
Yeah, it's a real city, and they mention it several times.
I'll have to pay
We'll
more
have to
attention.
get some demographic information.
So sorry. Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
I feel like that'd help build. You'd see it better and maybe understand a little better.
But so here they are playing pool, and this is the part where we are first introduced to this idea that for some reason we can't trust the results, right? They're doing like electron smashing and stuff like that, but every time they do it, they're getting something different. And so even if it's in the same place or whatever, and so they move the pool table all around and everything.
All of this moving a pool table, which is
Right.
520 pounds,
Yeah.
just to like prove this concept of how distressing it would be if the results were not what you expected it to be each time.
This strikes a certain nerve for me because when I was in college, I had a crooked pool table, like a really crooked pool table, and so we didn't have to move it. I could have done this like very easily. But the whole point is that what if these things weren't constant, right?
Yeah.
We talk about like, well, what if we're just like in this weird patch right now where the laws of physics work in such a way that it happens this way, and then they're going to change again, right? And I think about like if you shake a glass of water or something, like if you do it enough, like the water almost seems like it's still for a second, but it's not, right? It's still like going or whatever. And I have this memory, we've talked about this a few times, about this basketball court, and like the peace and chaos kind of thing. That's this chapter, right? I think it's this chapter.
It's Shooter and the Farmer.
Oh, I'll hang on to it. Can we go to Shooter and the Farmer?
I have nothing else to say about
Gotcha.
the
So,
other than, like,
chapter
just
6,
pure
Shooter and the
distress.
Farmer. I have some other things to say, but this one's...
Why I wrote down, can the fundamental nature of matter really be lawlessness?
Mm-hmm.
Can the stability really be a short-lived eddy in a chaotic event?
Right. Eddy is the word I was looking for, right? So, like, I've done a lot of whitewater rafting, and eddies are, like, if you have a rock... Do you know what an eddy is?
Yes.
If you have a rock, and there's water flowing around it, the water right behind it appears calm because of the way that the water is flowing or whatever. But it's not. It's all this chaos in this river. And I think that's, like, a really interesting idea, that the universe is all chaos and that we just happen to be in the eddy right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of terrifying because there's no way to prove it, in the same way that like these little beings are finding out about the shooter, right? Or that the turkeys are finding out that, like, oops, after all this science, we're going to get 8, right? Like, whatever. But so I have this memory of playing basketball in a gym with like my brother and a bunch of other kids at like a parents' night out or something. And I was probably like 8 years old, but my brother remembers this too. And all the basketballs are bouncing and kids are screaming. And there was this weird moment of pure silence for like 1 second. And then all the balls hit and the kids are screaming again. And I'll never forget that moment. And so here's what's interesting. When we started reading this book and we started talking about this, I asked my brother, do you remember that moment? And he does. But do you remember what he said other than that?
What?
He remembers it being in a different gym.
Oh, no, I didn't hear
The school had 2 gyms. And so we both remember that moment. We both know that it was at one of these parents' night out. But I remember it in the second floor gym and he remembers it in the first floor. And that is so cool. Tied in like with all this stuff, right? Like it's just such a neat moment, right? But that's like my real life Eddie, where there was this like weird, freaky moment of order born out of like pure chaos. And if you had just walked in for that second and walked out, you'd think everybody was being quiet.
Right.
But it was nonsense.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. It's so cool.
This chapter is where Wang Mao has all the numbers that show signs of intelligence popping up in the camera. And I remember upon first reading this, just what on earth? Okay. you are snapping pictures of your dog with your phone, and all of a sudden when you go back and look at those pictures, you have timestamps on all of those pictures that you knew weren't there and aren't related to anything. What's your course of action?
I got hacked. Restart my phone.
Okay, so what if you use my phone and one of those old school like phones?
I'm going to the doctor.
Okay, so I think it's really cool that they actually included all that in this chapter. Like, boy went to the doctor. I was like, how reasonable. And you never see that happen in moments of like.
But also, like, the doctor, right? He was like, it's gonna be okay, man. And he's like, no, I don't think you understand. The doctor was like, yeah,
that's weird.
He's
like, let's stress.
Let's him go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only other note that I have here is a note about all these female Hemingways.
Mm-hmm.
Just all of these female characters with no character built.
Yeah.
They're all just, they don't talk much.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh.
You know, Wang Mao's wife doesn't even have a name, right? Like she's unnamed.
She's crying and
yeah,
doesn't know how to use a camera.
And like, I don't know. I mean, like, she's not, at least yet, all that important of a character, but like, I mean, it is odd, right? Like, she's a mannequin.
He never mentions her name. He's done all this other stuff, not gone home, gone to other people's homes, and never once talked about his kid, his wife, or even a mental note of, I really need to get back because I need to start dinner or something like that. The only one who mentioned it was the doctor.
Yeah.
Who was like, you know.
Because we find out that he works with the wife. Like, that's the most information we get about her.
Yeah.
And you know what's really sad is we get more information about the scientist that killed herself that he never actually met than we do about his own wife.
Yeah, it's really odd.
And that's really tragic. But like, I think it tells us something about Wang, right? Like,
even,
I just don't get the feeling that he's really that attached to his wife.
Right. But even Wenjie does not have much character development.
That's true too.
She didn't talk much.
Yeah, but she's a Geiger counter, right? Like,
I just think it's an easy out.
I do too.
And just
maybe women characters are hard. I don't know.
And just for the record, this reference to her being a Hemingway, or I don't remember how the book stated it, but that was in this chapter, wasn't it?
I don't remember.
When Wang Mao went to meet that girl on the game. Didn't that happen in this chapter?
I think so.
And the narrator kind of describes her as Hemingway.
Because your next note, that she tells him that.
Yeah, like quit.
Yeah.
Yeah, just stop. Or isn't that what she's just stop? Just stop.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, there's this old story about Hemingway that he kind of placed this bet among his other writer friends. He said, if you're a writer worth your salt, you can tell a story in 6 words or less. And he ended up making the bet and winning the bet, which
sketch.
Yeah. But his story was baby shoes for sale, never worn. But it's just showing the author or the translator, I'm not sure, made this comparison to these women, or this one woman in particular that is playing the game. I cannot remember her name, and doesn't talk very much.
Mm-hmm.
She's just a woman of few words.
Right.
And the only thing she keeps saying over and over and over again in this chapter is, just stop.
Just stop. Yeah. On repeat. You know, and
just stop.
Explaining that Hemingway thing is interesting because I would have just assumed it like meant his character. I never would have put it together with that. That's very cool.
Brevity of
very cool
speech. Pack those words with meaning. I have a note that Wang Mao went into a full panic after wanting to prove Dasha wrong, which just cracks me up. But it also shows just how creepy things are. Like, what the heck are all these numbers?
Yeah.
And why? How? And how are they like bending around the colors in the picture so that they
like
can be seen
snaking up a
appropriately?
tree.
How are they just constantly in this field of vision? I mean, I get squiggly lines and I can not handle that sometimes. I don't know. I wouldn't be able to handle, just this running timer in front of.
Yeah, and they're counting down.
And is this what everyone else has seen? Because there is all this talk of all these scientists who, like...
and I think at this point we are led to believe that because this woman that plays the game, I can't remember her name, right?
Golly, I'm sorry. I don't know why I didn't write it down.
If, she said, he says, how do I get him to go away? And she says, just stop, right? Like, she seems to know something about these numbers.
I think she doesn't. I think she knows there's some tomfoolery because they've all experienced it.
But she knows that the number but like, she has a suggestion for how to fix this, and it's for him to stop working on his machine.
I do have just the last line written down. Like, this is the instructions from the computer girl, the computer Hemingway, the universal flicker for you.
Yeah, and like, what does that even mean?
Yeah,
very cool.
Weird.
And like for you, what about for other people?
Right. Yeah.
And it, it's gonna be something similar to this numbers situation, I guess. So.
3 days from now, that's the 14th. Yeah. Don't know. But that's. What else do you have?
That's it for my for the first part. It's good. We had all the backstory in the Silent Spring, and we're starting into this. We're starting into the mystery, right?
Right.
What are the numbers? How does that relate to foundations of science?
Frontiers.
Right. How does that relate to this woman who seems to know things?
Right. And what is her name? Yeah, I don't know. So, our next episode is going to be...
It's on the syllabus
It'll be
episode.
on the syllabus and in the description box below.
Check the box.
Yeah. After it.
Thank you for joining us. We will see you next time.
Yep. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Did you hit your glasses?
Yeah. You won.
Welcome to Books We Never Read.
Except for those we have.